My family disowned me over false assault claims. Now that they know the truth, they came crawling back. Brian was always the golden boy, not in the loud, boastful way that demands attention, but in the way everyone just naturally gravitates toward. At 30, he had this casual charisma, the kind that made people want to listen when he spoke and laugh, even when his jokes weren't that funny. And then there was Jessica, the girlfriend who managed to wrap herself around the entire family in record time. My parents loved her. She brought flowers for my mom, asked my dad about his old vinyl collection, and acted like she adored every minute of being around us. But I saw through it. Or at least, I thought I did. At first, I figured I was just being overly sensitive or maybe even a little jealous. Not jealous of their relationship. I couldn't care less who Brian dated, but of the way Jessica managed to win over everyone with what felt, to me, like a performance. Her smiles never quite reached her eyes. She asked questions that sounded thoughtful, but always carried a subtle dig underneath. Like when she found out I was still living at home, juggling engineering school and 2 part-time jobs, and said, "That's so sweet, Tyler. I love how you're not too proud to rely on your family." It was wrapped in sugar, but all I heard was her calling me pathetic. Brian never noticed. He looked at her like she was the best thing that had ever happened to him. And maybe, for him, she was. But every time she was around, I felt like I had to hold my breath. Like any wrong word or glance would end up twisted into something I didn't mean. I remember once she made a joke at my expense in front of everyone. Something about how my schedule was more packed than my social life. And I laughed it off, because that's what you're supposed to do, right? Laugh it off. But later, when I was alone in the garage sorting through old tools, I realized it had been bothering me all day. The worst part was knowing that if I said anything, I'd come off as bitter or paranoid. Brian would think I was just being difficult. My parents would say Jessica's been nothing but lovely. That's the word they used all the time. Lovely. Like she was a porcelain doll and not a living, breathing person with edges I knew they weren't seeing. So I kept quiet, focused on my coursework, my shifts at the auto shop, my life that felt like it was happening in the margins of everyone else's. Jessica started showing up more and more. Her toothbrush appeared in the bathroom. Her favorite brand of tea found a permanent spot in the kitchen. And little by little, it felt like she was tightening her grip, not just on Brian, but on the whole house. On all of us. I don't know what's going to happen. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. But I can't shake the feeling that this is just the calm before the storm. And I'm the only one who hears the thunder in the distance. It was supposed to be a quick stop. Brian had asked me to swing by his place to drop off a toolbox he'd forgotten. Nothing major, just a favor between brothers. I had a key, one of those little conveniences left over from before Jessica became a permanent fixture in our lives. I didn't knock. I never did. Brian was usually at work this time of day, and I figured I'd be in and out before anyone even noticed. But the second I pushed the door open, something felt off. The living room lights were off, blinds half drawn, casting long shadows across the hardwood. I set the toolbox down by the couch and was just about to head out when I heard it. Laughter, hushed voices, and the unmistakable creak of movement from the bedroom. I should have walked away. Instead, I moved toward the hallway, every step slower than the last. The door was slightly ajar, and what I saw through that narrow gap made my stomach drop like a stone. Jessica, tangled up with Chris, Brian's best friend since middle school. Her hands in his hair, his lips on her neck. Both of them so completely caught up in each other they didn't even notice me standing there, frozen. I shoved the door open. The sound it made, like something splitting, cut through their bubble instantly. Jessica gasped, pulling back so fast she nearly fell off the bed. Chris scrambled, clutching a pillow like it could somehow make him less guilty. My heart was pounding, my fists clenched at my sides. Not from rage, but from disbelief, so sharp it hurt. "What the hell is this?" I asked, my voice low, cracking. Jessica's face twisted, but not with guilt. Something else, something darker. Panic. She looked at Chris, then back at me, and in that split second I saw her calculating. Then she started to cry. Loud, theatrical sobs that didn't match the cold precision I'd just seen in her eyes. "He attacked me," she choked out, pointing at me. "Tyler, he barged in and tried to." I didn't know what to do. Chris didn't hesitate. He stood up, nodded like a puppet, and said, "Yeah, man, it was messed up." He just walked in and started grabbing her. I couldn't breathe. My own body felt foreign, like I wasn't standing in that room, but watching it from outside myself. "Are you serious right now?" I said, my voice barely audible. "You're lying. You both know exactly what I saw." Jessica kept sobbing, and Chris moved closer to her like he was her protector. "You need to go," he said, his voice firm. "I'm calling Brian." And that was the moment I realized I was screwed. They weren't just covering up a betrayal. They were rewriting the story entirely, painting me as the villain in a script I hadn't even agreed to read. I backed out of the room slowly, every cell in my body screaming to run, but my mind too numb to process anything beyond the immediate. By the time I reached the door, Jessica was still crying, Chris was still posturing, and I was already disappearing into a lie I hadn't chosen but couldn't escape. By the time I got home, my hands were still shaking. I hadn't even taken off my shoes before my phone started blowing up. First Brian, then Mom, then Brian again. I knew the second I saw Jessica reach for her phone that she'd try to flip the story, but I hadn't expected it to unravel this fast, this brutally. I didn't answer the calls. I needed a second, just one damn second to think. But then Brian showed up, slammed his car door so hard the whole neighborhood probably heard it. He didn't knock, just barged into the house like a storm, face flushed, eyes wild. I barely had time to stand before he was in my face. "What the hell did you do to her?" he yelled, his voice shaking with fury. "You touched her? My girlfriend." I raised my hands, not in defense, but in disbelief. "Brian, no, that's not what happened. I walked in and she was with Chris. I saw it. I walked in and she turned it around. She's lying." But Brian wasn't listening. He wasn't even hearing me. He shoved me back, hard, and I stumbled into the wall. My mom and dad came running in from the kitchen, faces pale, eyes wide, but not at Brian, at me. "Is it true?" my mom whispered. "Did you really? Tyler, tell me you didn't." My mouth opened but no sound came out. It didn't matter. I could see it in their faces. Jessica had already poisoned the well. Brian's voice cracked. "She called me crying. Said you pinned her. That you wouldn't stop." Chris saw the whole thing. I laughed, actually laughed, bitter and raw and jagged. "Are you kidding me? They're covering for each other. She's cheating on you, Brian." I caught them. She panicked and made up the one thing she knew would ruin me. But it was like I wasn't even in the room anymore. My mom started crying. My dad looked like he wanted to throw up. Brian stood there shaking, like he was holding back from swinging again. And then he said it. "We're calling the police." I stepped back like I'd been shot. "Are you serious? You're going to report your own brother over a lie?" He didn't even blink. "If you're innocent, they'll figure it out." The cops came an hour later. Knocked politely. Asked me to come down to the station for questioning. No handcuffs. Yet. But the shame of stepping into that squad car with neighbors peeking through their blinds was enough to make me want to disappear. I didn't even bother trying to explain again. What was the point? The people I loved, the ones who were supposed to know me better than anyone, had already made up their minds. And all it took was one girl's tears to turn my world into a nightmare. The holding cell smelled like sweat and disinfectant, like shame baked into cinderblock walls. I sat there for hours, head down, trying to replay every second of what happened, as if one detail could save me, undo it, make it make sense. The cops didn't rough me up or yell. They didn't have to. Their silence, their looks, the way they asked the same questions in different tones, that was enough. "Why were you there? Why didn't you leave right away? Did you touch her?" Over and over, like the answers were going to change if they caught me off guard. I told the truth. Every time. But the truth felt thin compared to the weight of an accusation. They let me out the next day, pending investigation. No charges yet, just a report and a world already cracked open beneath me. I got home, and my key barely turned in the lock. Mom didn't say a word when I walked through the door. Dad didn't even look up from his paper. The air in the house felt colder than I remembered, like even the walls wanted me gone. 2 days later, I got an email from my college. In light of the recent allegations, the rest blurred. I was out. Academic probation pending a formal review, but everyone knew what that meant. I couldn't show my face on campus again. The auto shop I worked at part-time called that same afternoon. They were sorry, but it's a bad look, and we have to think about our female employees, and maybe it's best if you take some time. Which meant I was fired. No income, no classes, no way forward. Then came the silence. Friends who used to send memes every day stopped replying altogether. Group chats went dead. I saw posts from people I knew talking about what had happened, vague enough to avoid legal trouble, but clear enough to let everyone know they believed her. Chris, that bastard, even liked one of the posts. All of them vanished. Except Marcus. He texted me the night after I got out. "I don't care what they're saying. I know you. Let me know what you need." And for the first time since everything fell apart, I felt something close to breath. He brought food, sat with me in the garage when I couldn't bear to be inside the house, and didn't ask dumb questions. Just listened. Just stayed. My own family didn't ask once what really happened. They didn't want to hear it. Didn't want to even acknowledge the possibility that their precious Jessica, the smiling, delicate guest they now treated like royalty, could be lying. I became a ghost in my own home. My plate would be left on the table, but no one spoke to me. No one met my eyes. My brother, my own brother, acted like I didn't exist. I stopped trying to explain. Stopped trying to defend myself. What was the point? In their eyes, I'd already been tried and sentenced. Not by a court, but by the people who were supposed to believe in me the most. 6 weeks. That's how long I lived in the shadow of a lie that refused to die. Every morning, I woke up to the same choking silence, the same cold indifference radiating from people who used to call me family. Jessica floated through those weeks like some fragile porcelain doll, playing the role perfectly. Soft voice, lowered eyes, the occasional trembling hand. My parents treated her like a wounded dove, moving around her with reverence, speaking in hushed tones, protecting her from me like I was some lurking monster in the corner of the living room. Brian wouldn't even look at me. He stopped eating at the same table, started locking his door when he left the house. My presence was poison. My name, a curse. And I couldn't leave, not because I didn't want to, but because I had nowhere else to go. Every job lead dried up the second someone recognized my name. The college cut ties completely. I spent my days in the garage, barely eating, not sleeping, waiting for a knock at the door that might end my life as I knew it. The investigation dragged on like an open wound. The police asked the same questions again and again and again, sometimes with subtle traps buried inside, sometimes with tired shrugs like they already knew how this would end. I told my story the same way every time. I didn't change a word. I didn't have to. Then something shifted. It started small. A comment Jessica had made to one officer didn't line up with what Chris told another. The timeline wobbled. Then they found text messages. Not just one or two, but months of them. Jessica and Chris had been seeing each other behind Brian's back for a long time, far longer than anyone suspected. Messages with dates, locations, inside jokes no one else could have known. Screenshots leaked. Someone anonymous, maybe someone with a conscience, forwarded them to the detective on the case. Suddenly, the mood changed. The next time I was called in, the tone was different. Less accusatory, more procedural. Still no apology, of course. That's not how these things go. But a few days later, they called me again. Said the charges were being dropped. Not enough evidence. Too many contradictions. No basis for prosecution. Just like that, it was over. Except it wasn't. Because what do you do with 6 weeks of being treated like filth? What do you do with the looks, the whispers, the silence? The college didn't reinstate me. The job didn't call back. The group chats stayed dead. My own family didn't even say anything when I walked through the front door that night. Not, "We're sorry." Not, "We were wrong." Just silence, like nothing had happened. Like the last 6 weeks hadn't turned me inside out. Jessica was gone. She moved out before the news hit the family. Cowardly, but predictable. Chris too. Probably fled with her or went to lay low somewhere. But it didn't matter. The truth came too late. The damage was done. The house wasn't home anymore. It was a graveyard, and I was the ghost left behind. It didn't matter that the charges were dropped. It didn't matter that the messages exposed Jessica and Chris for what they were. In this house, I was still the problem. The stain. The thing that made everyone uncomfortable. I tried, for maybe a second, to pretend things might ease up. That maybe they'd come around, see what she'd done, see how easily they'd been manipulated. But I was kidding myself. They didn't talk to me. Not directly. Not anymore. But they talked about me. I wasn't supposed to hear it. But walls are thin and people forget how sound carries when they're comfortable enough to stop pretending. I was in the hallway outside the kitchen one night, walking to the laundry room, when I heard my mom's voice, tired, cold, edged with a kind of fear that hadn't existed until Jessica brought it into the house. "I just don't feel safe with him here," she said. "Not after everything. Not when we don't really know what happened." My dad, the great protector, responded like he was discussing the weather. "They dropped the case, but that doesn't mean he didn't do something. You know how these things go." And then Brian, the brother I used to worship. His voice didn't even flinch. "If she ever comes back, I don't want her walking into a house where he still lives. We need to think about what's best for her." What's best for her? That line stuck in my chest like a blade. Not what's true, not what's right, just what's easiest to believe. What lets them sleep better at night. I stood there in the dark for a long time after that. Didn't move, didn't breathe, just listened to them talk about me like I was already gone. That night, I packed. I didn't have much. A couple duffel bags, some clothes, my laptop, a stack of notebooks I hadn't touched in weeks. Marcus had mentioned his cousin had a spare room out of town, nothing big, but cheap and quiet. I didn't leave a note, didn't slam any doors. I just slipped out the way they clearly wished I had months ago. No goodbyes, no second chances. They had made their choice, and I finally made mine. Toronto wasn't a dream. It wasn't even a plan. It was a name on a map that sounded far enough and anonymous enough to give me a chance to breathe. I crossed the border with whatever cash I'd scraped together, a duffel bag slung over one shoulder, and a backpack that still smelled like the garage I used to sleep in. No one knew me here. No one cared. And that was the best thing I could have asked for. The first place I found was a basement studio that barely passed code. all exposed pipes and flickering lights, the kind of place you didn't want to touch anything barefoot. The landlord was sketchy but didn't ask questions, didn't run checks, didn't even blink when I paid in cash. I took it on the spot. It wasn't home, but I wasn't looking for home anymore. Just a place to disappear. Work came fast, but not the kind you write about. Construction gigs, mostly. The kind where you're up before the sun and covered in dirt before your second cup of coffee. No union. No benefits. Just your name on a clipboard and your hands in the mud. I didn't complain. I couldn't. Every morning I hauled rebar, carried plywood, laid brick until my shoulders burned and my knuckles split open. I got calluses over my calluses. The pain helped. It gave my mind something to hold on to besides everything I left behind. The nights were worse. The quiet made it harder. I kept the windows shut even when it was sweltering, kept the chair jammed under the door handle even though the building had security. I didn't trust locks. I didn't trust silence. Some days I didn't even trust myself. I changed my name a year in. Legal, official, filed with the province. New ID, new SGIN, new everything. I picked a name that didn't mean anything, that didn't sound like the one whispered behind hands and spat in anger. I needed the distance. Needed to sever the last thread connecting me to the person I used to be. Not because I was ashamed of who I was, but because everyone else had turned him into someone I couldn't carry anymore. Marcus was the only one who didn't disappear. He came up once in the fall, brought a six-pack and that stupid sandwich from our favorite deli like nothing had changed. He didn't pity me. He didn't press. He just showed up, sat on my ripped vinyl couch, and listened. And when I needed it, when things got too heavy and the walls felt too close, he'd show up again. Maybe only twice a year, but it meant more than anything else. Toronto didn't save me, but it gave me enough space to start figuring out how to save myself. One broken brick at a time. It wasn't anything cinematic. No meet cute, no dramatic spark. Just a cold morning in a corner coffee shop, and a girl in scrubs who smiled like she'd seen something in me I didn't even know was still there. Emily, a nursing student who worked nights and studied like her life depended on it. I didn't talk to her the first time, or the second, but she kept showing up, ordering the same tea, wearing the same tired but kind eyes. One day I made some dumb joke about the burnt muffins, and she laughed like it was the funniest thing in the world. She never asked about my past, not at first. She asked about what I liked to cook, about music, about where I grew up, and I told her just enough to keep things light. But she looked at me like she knew there were cracks under the surface. And she didn't try to fix them. She just stayed. Steady. Patient. Meeting her family was the first time I'd felt the warmth of a home since I was a kid. Her mom hugged me without hesitation. Her dad grilled me, but in that normal protective way, not like he was scanning for lies. Her siblings welcomed me like I belonged. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel like I was hiding. I didn't flinch when someone touched my shoulder. I didn't have to pretend I was smaller than I was. We got married quietly. No big wedding. Just a small backyard, some fairy lights, and a few of her closest friends. Marcus was there, grinning like a proud older brother. That night, I watched her dance barefoot in the grass and thought, maybe this is what healing looks like. Not fireworks. Just soft laughter and someone who stays. When the twins came, a boy and a girl, I didn't feel panic. I felt purpose. I held them in my arms, and something inside me locked into place. I made a silent promise right then that no matter what, they would grow up knowing they were safe. That their home would never feel like a courtroom. That they would never be made to question their worth or wonder if they were believed. I named my son after Marcus. I named my daughter after nothing at all, because she was her own beginning. Being a father didn't erase what happened to me, but it gave the pain a shape, a boundary, a way to exist without consuming me. I still have the scars. Still wake up sometimes with the echoes of that house in my head. But now, when I look around, I see more than what I lost. I see what I built with my own hands. I see a life they couldn't destroy. And I see two little faces that will never have to carry the weight of someone else's betrayal. Not on my watch. It was a Saturday, early fall, just cool enough that the leaves were starting to turn and the air had that crisp, quiet hum that made mornings feel peaceful. I was outside raking, watching my son try to build a leaf pile that was more twigs than leaves, while my daughter kept trying to jump into it early, giggling like she was getting away with something. Emily was inside baking, music playing low through the open kitchen window. Everything about that day was normal, beautiful even, until a car pulled into the driveway. It wasn't a rental or an Uber. It was too familiar, too plain, the kind of car that's supposed to blend in. And then the door opened, and I saw him. My father. He looked older, like time had pressed down on his shoulders and never let up. His eyes were still the same, sharp, cautious, but the arrogance they used to carry had dulled. I didn't move. I didn't call out. I just stood there, rake in hand, waiting. He walked up slow, not like someone visiting family, more like someone stepping onto uncertain ground. "Tyler," he said, and just hearing him say my name after all these years felt like something snapping behind my ribs. I didn't say anything. He looked down at the rake in my hands, then at the kids, who had gone quiet and drifted closer to the porch. "Can we talk?" he asked, voice low, like he already knew he was unwelcome. We sat on the porch. I didn't invite him in. I didn't offer coffee. I just waited. He told me Brian found out 6 months ago that Jessica had never stopped seeing Chris, that she'd confessed, not out of guilt, but during a fight, when the lies started piling up and she finally lost control. She admitted everything. The affair, the setup, the false accusation. Brian lost it. Not just the marriage, but the story he'd believed, the brother he'd condemned, the foundation of the last 8 years. He spiraled. My dad didn't get into details, just said he'd taken it hard, like it wasn't obvious that letting guilt rot you for almost a decade might leave scars. And then my dad looked at me, really looked, and said, "We were wrong. All of us. We should have listened. We should have trusted you." It didn't land the way he thought it would. There was no relief, no catharsis, just this cold, hollow ache that had been there for so long it didn't know how to leave. He asked if we could start over, if I could forgive them. I looked at him, and for the first time in 8 years, I let myself really feel it. The betrayal, the abandonment, the way they watched me drown and called it necessary. I thought about the years I spent clawing my way out of a hole they helped bury me in, the nights I lay awake next to the woman who saved me, praying my kids would never feel what I felt. I didn't answer right away, because some silences don't need to be filled. They need to be understood. He sat on my porch and told me everything. Every twisted detail. How Jessica had slowly unraveled under the weight of her own lies. How Chris bailed the second the truth came out. How Brian had tried to piece together the wreckage of a marriage built on a foundation of betrayal. How my mother cried for days after Jessica's confession, saying she didn't know how they could have gotten it so wrong. How Brian, after all this time, finally admitted that I had been telling the truth, that I had been right. And I listened, quietly, not because I needed to hear it, but because I wanted him to hear himself. I wanted him to sit in the silence after every word and realize the damage they had done wasn't just a temporary fracture. It was a permanent amputation. I let him speak, let him apologize in his stiff, half-broken way, let him hand me Brian's phone number like it was a peace offering instead of a reminder of the years they chose to believe a stranger over their own blood. When he was done, I didn't yell. I didn't ask why. I just stood up. "It's too late," I said, looking him in the eye. "You made your choice. And I made mine." I walked him down the steps, all the way to the car. He didn't fight it, didn't beg. He just nodded like a man who knew he'd already lost the one thing he came to reclaim. I turned around before he even started the engine. Inside, I opened my hand and stared at the slip of paper with Brian's number on it. I stood at the sink and watched it dissolve as I turned on the tap. Ink bleeding into the porcelain like it had never meant anything. Like it never should have. Then I sat on the floor, head in my hands, and cried. Not out of sadness, but because, for the first time in nearly a decade, I felt free.